Welcome to Age-Friendly Cleveland. My name is Mary McNamara, and I'm the Director of Aging for the City of Cleveland. Across our country, we have what we call an aging network of services, because no one division of government, hospital system, agency, or faith-based organization provides all of the services an older adult might want or need to age successfully. As examples, some older adults may need transportation, or modifications to their home, or home health care, or resources to stay engaged after retirement. It is our hope with this Age-Friendly Cleveland series that you might learn more about the resources right here in Cleveland. This next segment is about one of our trusted agencies or departments we work closely with every day to make Cleveland an age-friendly city. Welcome to Age-Friendly Cleveland. I'm Mary McNamara, Director of Aging here at the city's Department of Aging. And today we're talking about fair housing. And my guest is Tanesha Hunter, the Director of Education and Outreach at the Fair Housing Center for Rights and Research. Welcome, Tanesha.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Tanesha, let's start off. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do at the Fair Housing Center.
Great. So again, thank you for having me today. I am a native Clevelander, and my background is in gerontology. And so for a number of years prior to me working at the Fair Housing Center for Rights and Research, I worked in several different programs working with older adults and adults with disabilities. Now, if you are not familiar with the Fair Housing Center, we are a nonprofit fair housing agency, and we're located right here in Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay.
But we serve all of Cuyahoga and Lorain counties. And our mission essentially is to protect and expand current fair housing rights and stop housing discrimination from occurring.
Tanesha, let's get to some definitions. What is fair housing? When you hear that word, what's it mean?
Yeah, so a lot of people aren't aware of fair housing. And so fair housing essentially is the right to choose the housing of your choice, free from unlawful discrimination.
Okay.
At the Fair Housing Center, we fundamentally believe that housing is a human right, and everyone deserves safe, decent, and affordable housing, and should be able to access housing free from unnecessary barriers or from unlawful discrimination.
Okay. And the Fair Housing Act, how does that protect us as residents?
Sure. So we have had a fair housing law in place for over 50 years now.
Okay.
It was signed just shortly after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968. And so our federal fair housing law prohibits discrimination in housing-related transactions. So a housing-related transaction might mean the buying of a home, selling of a home, renting a home, buying homeowners insurance, things of that nature. And so it prohibits discrimination in those acts. So if a provider of one of those services, for example, a landlord or a property manager or even a bank, if they deny someone or treat someone differently because of their protected class, that would be illegal.
Well, that leads us to what is a protected class? Who's in that?
Yeah, so we are all protected under fair housing law. We all are a member of a protected class.
Okay.
But it's a shared characteristic. So on the federal level, we have 7 protected classes, which include race, the color of our skin, religion, national origin, sex, which also includes sexual orientation and gender identity, as well as disability and family status, which means the presence of children under the age of 18. That's on the federal level, meaning that someone cannot treat you differently or deny you housing because of those protected classes.
Okay.
On the state level, we have some additional protected classes. So here in Ohio, we have ancestry and military status as additional protected classes. And then to take it even further, in the city of Cleveland has its own fair housing ordinance, which provides even further protections that federal and state law doesn't protect. So for example, in the city of Cleveland, age is a protected class.
Okay. Tanesha, can you give us an example or two of housing discrimination in the work you've seen? I'm sure we could spend a whole segment on this. But
yes, and I'm so glad you have us here today, because many folks don't know how to recognize when housing discrimination is occurring. So for a quick example, if an older adult perhaps utilizes a wheelchair and they are going to apply for an apartment, and the housing provider tells them, because you utilize this wheelchair, or because you need this wheelchair, unfortunately, I can't allow you to rent the apartment. We don't have a ramp here, so unfortunately, you can't live here. That would be housing discrimination under the basis of disability.
Okay.
Another example would be perhaps if an older adult is in a kinship situation, right? They're a grandparent raising their grandchildren, and they are going to apply for housing. And the housing provider tells them, oh, because you have children, or because you have X amount of children, we can't rent to you.
Okay.
Or even if the housing provider tells them, we can only have you stay on the first floor because you have children, right? We don't want them making noise and running around on the second floor. Steering that person only to the first floor would then also be housing discrimination under the basis of familial status.
Those are really two powerful examples that I imagine happen quite a bit.
Yes,
in
they
our
do.
Community. So you talked about this a little bit about your work in aging and gerontology. So how do you think fair housing laws support people wanting to age in place?
Yeah, so fair housing laws definitely support aging in place. As we age, we want to remain in the homes that we're in, or we might even decide perhaps to downsize or to move closer to family members. And so we want to ensure that the homes that folks are staying in are accessible to them. And in certain circumstances, the homes that people are currently in, or maybe even deciding to move to, are not necessarily meeting their needs physically as they age. And so the Fair Housing Act, as it's amended in 1988, requires that certain new properties built, multifamily dwellings that's built after March 13th, 1991, requires it to have certain accessibility features, like a no-step entrance.
Okay.
And so the Fair Housing Act supports aging in place in that as one of the ways.
That's great to hear. Tanesha, can you talk to us about reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications? We get that call sometimes in the Department of Aging, and even myself, I find myself confused with that. So tell us more.
Sure, no problem. So let's first talk about how reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications cover persons with disabilities under fair housing law, and how that intersection meets with older adults. So people are considered to be covered as a person with a disability under fair housing law if they meet a very specific definition. And that definition is to have a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits a major life activity, one or more major life activities. And many older adults have conditions that regularly occur with aging that would allow them to meet that definition. So many older adults are considered to be covered as a person with a disability under fair housing law. Okay. And so the additional protections that are put in place for persons with disabilities are called reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications. Now, a reasonable accommodation is a change to a policy or procedure that governs the resident. So essentially, it's a change in a policy that can accommodate a person's need. So for example, a reasonable accommodation would be allowing a service animal or an emotional support animal, despite a housing provider having a no pet policy, right? A housing provider is changing their policy to accommodate the person with a disability. Another example might be to allow a reserved parking space, right? A person who has mobility issues might need to have a parking space close to their entrance. So allowing them a closer parking space to meet their need. That's an example of reasonable accommodations. Reasonable modifications are physical changes to the interior of one's own unit or to common use areas. So if you're living in an apartment, for example, a modification perhaps to the interior of your unit, like having grab bars installed, or to common use areas like a lobby. So for example, if you need a ramp installed because you utilize a wheelchair, that would be an example of a reasonable modification.
Oh, that helps. What I am feeling though is I bet a lot of viewers, if they had questions, I want to get that phone number out there to your office, because this can be technical.
Yes, it
so
can.
We'll say it again at the end, but what's the number to reach you at the Fair Housing Center?
Yes, if folks have questions about reasonable accommodations, reasonable modifications, who's covered as far as disability is concerned, they can always give a call to our office. They can reach us at 216-361-9240.
It's great that you're right here in Cleveland. You're a local Clevelander. So let's go to this one. A question we get often too is, what should someone do if they're experiencing discrimination or have a fair housing issue? Is the first step calling the Fair Housing Center?
Absolutely. Folks can give us a call, and we can take a route of either assisting them in advocating. So we'll contact the housing provider on their behalf, see what's going on, and then try to remedy the situation from there. If the housing provider maybe still doesn't want to do their obligation to fair housing law, we might assist someone in filing an administrative complaint against that housing provider. And so there are several different means for which a person would do that. They could file an administrative complaint through their local Fair Housing Review Board, the Ohio Civil Rights Commission, or through HUD. And we can assist with that process. We can assist with the paperwork. We can really walk someone through that process so that they don't have to do it alone.
That's great, Tanesha. How can I learn more about my fair housing rights?
Yes, so we often offer different trainings and different meetings that folks can come to learn more about their fair housing rights. So again, folks can call our phone number at 216-361-9240 and ask about different events going on in the community. Or if you use the internet, you can go on our website at thehousingcenter.org/events.
That's great. Tanesha, is there anything we forgot that you want to make sure viewers know as we come to a close here?
Mary, I think we really captured the gist of it, but I just really want to reiterate that if folks need assistance, because fair housing law can be a little bit confusing sometimes, so we want to be sure that folks know that we are a resource. So give us a call if you're unsure, and if you're a housing provider and you're not sure of your obligation to fair housing law. If you own some rental properties, you can also give us a call to understand what's your obligation to fair housing law.
Sounds like a great resource. I'm so glad you're on joining us today for this segment. So thank you, Tanesha. And thank you for watching Age Friendly Cleveland. I'm Mary McNamara. We'll see you soon.